Hello everybody, welcome to the agony and ecstasy of MDMA. My name is Floor van Bakken and I'm from Jelinek. For people who don't live in the Netherlands, Jelinek is an addiction care facility that also does prevention projects around alcohol and drugs. And this evening is hosted by Unity. Unity is a drugs education project where trained volunteers give drug educations to people in nightlife setting. And they have invited a guest speaker, Guy Jones. And afterwards there will be time for a panel where you can ask your questions to Guy and to other experts that you have on alcohol and drugs. Part of the Unity crew is here. They're wearing Unity t-shirts, so if you have a question that you don't want to ask in the panel, you can ask them afterwards to them. You can see them in the t-shirts over there. And also Suzani is here. Suzani? She will manage the microphone later on during the panel, and if you have a question to ask the panel, you can address her and she will come up to you. Okay, well, now I first want to introduce to you Guy. Guy Jones has been involved in drug science since 2010 and has a background in chemistry. He works at Loop. And Loop is a UK service that provides festival drug checking. And he's also a trustee to Kosmicaid, which is a service that is dedicated to helping people who are undergoing difficulties, drug-related experiences at festivals and music events. In this Unity College, Guy Jones will address the acute risks of MDMA. How dangerous is MDMA really? And what can we do to prevent those risks? In his talk, he will address the acute risks, and he will give practical harm reduction tips. Guy, the floor is yours.
Very much, Phil. Just start up stopwatch. Great. So, yeah, I've been involved in drug science for quite a long time, and doing the drug checking in the UK and the welfare has given me a real kind of insight into how things work, as well as my background in chemistry, also allowing me to understand a lot of the science behind it. So it puts me in a really good position to understand and help to kind of educate people about what some of the risks of MDMA are and how we can get around those. So MDMA is what we call an amphetamine-type stimulant. It shares some features of amphetamine, that it's stimulating, but there are some critical differences as well. It's actually more popular than amphetamine itself and is the third most popular drug in Europe, behind cocaine and cannabis. So you can see on the right-hand side there, a very popular delivery method for MDMA in ecstasy tablets. And at the bottom there you can see on the left-hand side the amphetamine structure, and you can see how that can overlay onto the MDMA structure on the right. You can also see that there's a change to the MDMA structure, and that creates some critical differences for us. So you can see the structures here where we can overlay MDMA onto the serotonin structure. Because of that similarity, MDMA can go to places in the brain where serotonin is usually found. And it does that in a much more effective way than amphetamine itself. And this really changes the effects of a stimulant from a plain stimulant into what we call an empathogen, so something that generates empathy. And we see perhaps one of the key reasons that people enjoy taking MDMA at music events is because of the increased music enhancement, the real enjoyment of music, and there's a less forceful stimulation than a conventional stimulant. So if it's taken in a more relaxed setting, then it can be a more relaxed experience. It doesn't force you to be energetic, it doesn't force you to rush around, and this is actually something that is used to great effect where it is partnered with therapy. It also has a much more empathetic social aspect, so rather than just wanting to tell one's own life story, people might be more willing to listen to the life stories of others. As well as changing the effects though, it also changes the risks. So it reduces some of the risks associated with a plain stimulant, particularly effects on the heart. And there's a reduced addiction risk as well, because there is less interaction with the dopamine system, the reward system of the body. There's less compulsivity and less of a sort of seeking out the drug. There is, partnered with this as well, we have the fact that MDMA depletes serotonin. So the enjoyable effects are considerably reduced if you keep taking it day after day. As well as the reductions in risks though, we also see, because of this increased serotonergic effect, we see an increase in the risks associated with serotonin release. And we can sort of think of this as a kind of serotonin overload when very large doses are taken. So serotonin is really, really important. It's found in organisms from the tiniest little worms and has evolved with animals right up and is in so many different processes in the brain. And particularly of relevance to MDMA, it has a key role in temperature regulation, how the body feels hot and decides how it's going to manage its temperature, in appetite, in sleep, and also dreaming as well, a very strong effect, and also in water retention, how the body decides how hydrated it is and whether you need more or less water. And so not only are these relevant when we're taking MDMA, but also in some of the very common environments where people take MDMA, so in dance environments, these risks are modulated even if MDMA is not taken. So if you think about a crowded club, then it's likely to be hot, you're probably not going to want to go and figure out where you're going to eat your dinner, and you certainly don't want to be sleeping, so you're there to enjoy yourself. And the water retention we'll come on to, that becomes really, really important. Before I come and look at these specific risks though, there are, when we think about addressing specific risks, it's always better to try and prevent the problems before they occur. So rather than trying to treat a problem that has already arisen with perhaps overheating or overhydration, if we can avoid that problem happening in the first place, that's even better. And with MDMA, sensible dosing is something, as with any drug, as with the way that a doctor might manage a patient taking a medication, we have to think about what is the appropriate dose for this person. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's a dosage table from Psychonaut Wiki, which lists some of the common dosages that people use. In the UK, this is still a real struggle for us. In the Netherlands, maybe less so, but in the UK, it's not uncommon for people to take over 500 milligrams over the course of the night, so well off the end of that scale. Ideally, we want to be having people weigh their doses, because that is the perfect way to understand exactly how much you're taking and how your body is responding to that. If not, then we have a campaign in the UK called Crush, Dab, Wait. And what we suggest is that people crush down the drugs that they have, either pills or crystal, and they then dab that with their little finger and eat what sticks to it. It's not as accurate as weighing it, as you can imagine, but when we're thinking about harm reduction, we're not trying to be perfect. The ideal way to eliminate the risks from drugs and have a perfect lack of risk is to not take them at all. But with harm reduction, we have to accept that people are taking risks and we want to minimise them while still allowing them to make their own decisions. Something that we try to drum into people in the UK is that you can always take more, but you can never take less after you've already taken it. So that crush, dab, wait method, waiting for it to affect you and then deciding, how is my body responding to this? Is this much stronger than normal or much weaker? Identifying your compound. In the Netherlands, you're really, really lucky to have the testing services, Jelinek. In the UK, we don't have this, so if that's not available, then thinking about sending it off to a mail-in service or even using a home testing kit is better than nothing. It's not perfect, you're not necessarily going to get a perfect identity, but it allows you to just alert yourself if something's really, really wrong. And then also thinking that mixing drugs, even including alcohol and cannabis, can really make things less predictable. And a lot of people don't realise this, particularly if they've got experience with each drug on its own. They may think, well, that's simple, I know how that's going to affect me, but it's a lot less predictable than that. So trying to avoid mixing drugs, especially if people are new to using them. So water retention. This is something that is perhaps one of the most understated risks of MDMA. MDMA causes the release of something called antidiuretic hormone, and this is the hormone that the body uses to tell itself internally, am I dehydrated or am I overhydrated? And MDMA causes the release of this hormone, which causes the body to say to itself, I'm dehydrated and I need to take on more water. So it becomes harder to pee and the mouth becomes dry. And that's a key conscious clue that causes people to think, my mouth is dry, I want to drink water. The problem with this is that when you're not peeing, your body takes on more and more water and your blood becomes almost diluted. So there is a lack of sodium in the blood, and that can cause serious problems, initially starting with headaches, but can lead to sort of bodily weakness, vomiting, and in severe cases even death. Something that we're increasingly realising is that this really disproportionately affects women. We believe because of the role of estrogen also in hydration. And so at certain points in the menstrual cycle, there's a particular risk with this. The way that we deal with it is thinking about, rather than just listening to what the body is telling you, also applying logic and being aware of the fact that MDMA is going to change how the body manages its hydration. So looking out for this and drinking a normal amount of water for the activity you're doing, whether you feel thirsty or not. What we suggest is about ½ a litre per hour if you're dancing and in a hot environment, and about ¼ of a litre per hour if you're in a calmer environment. Isotonic sports drinks like Powerade have a small amount of sodium in them, and these can be an even better way of reducing the risks associated with overhydration. That is distinct though from energy drinks like Red Bull and Monster, which don't contain sodium but contain caffeine instead. Generally, if you're on MDMA, you probably don't need more stimulation, and this is something to avoid, as with excessive alcohol use, which can also affect the way that your body manages its hydration level. So MDMA also makes temperature regulation less effective. During normal operation of the body, we have a process called vasodilation. So when your body gets hot, the veins near the surface of the skin expand, and they let the hot blood be exposed to the cool surface of the skin, and that blood is then pumped back into the centre of the body to cool down the vital organs. With MDMA, and indeed any stimulant, those blood vessels are constricted slightly in a process called vasoconstriction. The blood stays inside the core of the body, and it doesn't get exposed and cooled down through sweat on the surface of the skin. So there's an increased risk of overheating. We also have people dancing, and that physical activity is causing us to be hotter. And there may also be restricted airflow. If you're in a crowded club and you've got 8 people around you, you're not going to get a nice breeze to you. So the action that we suggest to take about this is taking regular breaks from dancing, taking a moment to sort of step outside, perhaps into a smoking area, and just sort of having a chat with people, gauging how your body feels when you're not with the stimulation of the lights and music, and just thinking, okay, how do I feel right now? Do I need to take maybe 15 minutes to cool down, or actually, am I good? I can go back in a bit sooner. If you are drinking water, as you should be in that sensible amount, then drinking cold water is much more effective, of course, for cooling down the core of the body than drinking hot tap water that you've just refilled from the tap. Also avoiding wearing hats and heavy clothing. The head is a key part of the body where a lot of heat is lost from, and so by wearing a furry hat, even if it looks great or indeed it feels good, is not necessarily a good idea. Serotonin is also really important for controlling appetite. So when people take MDMA, their appetite tends to be completely lost. And because of this, it may provide the body with a sort of deficit from several hours of partying, you're using a lot of energy, and your body isn't able to replenish that at the end of the evening because you don't feel hungry. So making sure that you eat before you go out, just make sure that your body's in good condition to enjoy the party as much as possible, and then make the fastest recovery as well. The added benefit of this is that if the MDMA is taken and sort of slowly moves through the gut with the food, then it's absorbed a bit more slowly and it's a much smoother experience. So rather than seeing a peak initially where you feel, oh, I think I'm coming up too hard, I'm really too high, and then a trough where you feel, oh, it's wearing off, maybe I need to have some more, you get a much smoother experience and you don't have those fluctuations that cause you to perhaps take more at the bottom of the trough and then overshoot afterwards. Watery, fresh foods are more appetizing, so making sure you have a little bit of the fruit in the house for when you get back, eating a banana before you go to bed, can just, again, allow your body to make the best recovery it can. Serotonin also plays a major role in sleep and in dreaming. So if you've still got MDMA in your system, then it can really disrupt your sleep and cause quite turbulent dreams. Some people also find that they have a condition called sleep paralysis, and this is where the brain wakes up during sleep and the eyes can open, but the body can't move, and it's quite a disconcerting experience for many people. So to avoid this, and the other thing of course is that if there's a lot of MDMA still in your system, you may be completely unable to sleep. So there's a high chance that you wouldn't be able to get good rest ready for your next day. What we recommend therefore is stopping dosing 2 to 3 hours before the end of the party. You'll still be able to have some in your system, to have that energy and stamina to keep going, but it gives you a much better chance of getting a good night's rest ahead of your next evening. If you are partying many days in a row, then you have this kind of built-up sleep debt, and that can increase the chance of experiencing paranoia. And also sleep deprivation, also the effects of stimulants themselves can increase the chance of paranoia. So through their influence on the dopamine system, they can cause us to have a higher chance of slight hallucinations and a generally anxious and unpleasant experience. So making sure that you get a good enough rest not only gives you the opportunity to enjoy the party better, but a much reduced chance of having side effects. If something does go wrong, what we have to think about with illegal drugs is that this isn't a regulated market. This isn't a case where you've been to the doctor and you've been able to get really good advice every time. There's always the chance that maybe you don't feel like seeking help as soon as you would do if it was due to a regular medication. So staying with your friends is really useful advice that we can give people, because one's own friends are much more likely to look out for us. And likewise, we can return that favour. If somebody's feeling a bit unwell, then we can talk to them and sort of reassure them if necessary, or maybe encourage them to seek help. Don't be afraid to go to the medics. So through working with Kosmicaid, something that really stands out to me is the festival medics are incredibly caring and generally really want to see people make it back to the party. So it's not a case where you're going to go to them and then you're going to get arrested. It's a case that you can go to them and they'll check you out and they'll be able to reassure you or give you what you need and then ideally send you back to the party. They don't want you sitting in there for hours any more than you want to be sitting in there for hours. So the kind of key points to think about then are this knowing how much you're taking, using the crushed down weight method. The alternative, if we've got pills, is there's a nice rhyme that we have in English, is start with a quarter and go easy on the water. It just allows us to sort of think about with the increasing strength of pills. This is something that we've really seen in the UK and I know in the Netherlands as well. There are some pills which contain 2 or even 3 doses of MDMA. So even half a pill can be an excessive amount for somebody who is of a petite stature or even just new to MDMA and maybe wouldn't be ready for a massive effect straight off. So breaking a pill up into small pieces is a much better way of doing it. And yes, starting with that small amount initially, because you can't untake something when you've already taken it. Sipping water, yeah, the overhydration is something that I think perhaps lands more people in with us at Kosmicaid than we see from overheating itself. And drinking water is not the ideal way of dealing with overheating anyway. As I say, the key thing is taking those breaks to cool down. Stepping out to the smoking area, a really good opportunity to make some new friends as well. Of course, it's not just the music appreciation from MDMA, but also the kind of enjoyment of socialising. Looking after yourself and just kind of keeping an eye out for yourself, popping out a banana for you before you get back at the end of the evening, and just being nice to yourself. And something that I haven't really covered in detail in this is leaving good breaks between uses of MDMA. So thinking about, rather than using it week in, week out, trying to enhance your enjoyment by using it for special occasions. So something that we see with MDMA is that more regular use leads to an increased tolerance. And with that increased tolerance, the good effects are reduced but the negative effects are enhanced. So not only are we needing to take more, which is putting us at higher risk, costing more money, but we're getting less enjoyment out of it. So far better to use it less frequently and really make the most of those experiences and enjoy them to the maximum. One of the big issues that we see with this is it's kind of a semi-permanent effect. So somebody who really overdoes MDMA and perhaps uses it every week for a year, even if they leave a very long break of 1 to 2 years, they may still find afterwards that they have the reduced serotonergic effects, so they have a reduced kind of social connection, and maybe they feel the stimulant effects more strongly because they're taking that dose to try and overcome and get those empathogenic effects back, but it's not effective. And so this is quite a common misconception we see in the UK. People have used it heavily, often think my tablets or my ecstasy or my MDMA powder has been cut with amphetamine, and we test it and it hasn't been. And we ask them a little bit about their past use, and it always emerges that they've been a very heavy user in the past. Some of them have taken breaks and some of them haven't, but that's the common theme. So thank you very much. Yes, I think we'll have the questions in the panel session now. I'm always really happy to speak about sort of MDMA, drug checking in general, so fire away.
Thank you very much, Guy. If you have any, we're going to start the panel now. I'm going to introduce the people from the panel, so if you can come up to the stage, great. And in the meanwhile, if you have a question, please raise your hand so one of the people with the microphones can come up to you. I want to introduce the people from the panel. First of all, there's Sjoerd. Sjoerd is co-founder of The Good Guys. Sit down wherever you want. And he's also founder of Air Club. And nowadays he's festival director of Open Air, Buitenwesten and Valhalla. And also he's one of the instigators of the Celebrate Safe campaign. And then I also introduced Judith. Judith has been working in health and nightlife education since 2005, and she manages the Celebrate Safe campaign, which is a project working in close collaboration with all safer nightlife for stakeholders to give education in nightlife settings. Then we have Mark Smith here. Mark Smith is General Director of MedEvent, and MedEvent is an organization that provides professional medical care at all types of events. And then here we have Raoul. Raoul Koning is coordinator of the Unity project, which is a peer project, and he also works for the Amsterdam Test Service since 2011. Are there any questions in the audience already, before I start? Okay, well then I'll ask... Oh, there is?
Actually, a really practical question. About the customers in the Netherlands, you touched upon the medics before. Do the medics at the clubs do testing if requested?
So in the UK, they're the only organisation that does any testing is us as the Loop, and the medics don't have. They're medical experts, but they're not drug experts and they're not drug checking experts. So when we're on site, we will absolutely test samples for them, but we're not on site everywhere. Our biggest presence is at some music festivals, so they don't have the opportunity to access that. And one of the things that they say is really valuable about having us on site doing that drug checking is that they have access to our expertise. They may not come to us for every case, but they can, when they need to, when they want to learn about perhaps a new compound or a patient who's come in with unusual symptoms, they can come and get that sample tested and learn from us about what that drug is.
Is that true for the Netherlands as well?
Mark, can you answer that? If it's the same for the Netherlands, drug checking and medical services.
Yeah, that's completely apart from each other. Drug testing is done by the Institute of Addiction Care.
Yes.
Maybe I can add a little bit to that. The DIMS, the Drugs Information Monitoring System, that's in the Trimbos Institute in the Utrecht. They do the drug testing, and they also have a good network of hospitals and first aids. And nowadays, if a first aid have an emergency and they, for example, find a pill or some powders, they can have it analyzed, but it doesn't happen often. So maybe 5 to 10 times a year, maximum. So it doesn't happen often.
Ro, could you tell us something about the Dutch situation of the drugs market? Because you've seen through testing, you've seen how it is in the Netherlands. I mean, we were already talking about it. It was very high dose. What can you tell us about that?
Well, lately, ever since 2009, we have seen the average on MDMA or ecstasy tablets, we've seen it rise. So while before 2009 the average was roughly 70 or 80 milligrams per tablet, now we see an average of around 160 milligrams of MDMA per tablet. So that's pretty much double of what it used to be. Still not a 500 milligrams that the people in the UK are taking, but still it's, it means that we have tablets, for example, that contain 200 milligrams or more, which means that if you're 50 or 60 kilos, one tablet is already way too much. So for ecstasy, it's the high content of MDMA is actually now the thing that we're most worried about, not necessarily all the adulterants and other substances that we find. And I think it will be similar in the UK that you find.
I heard there were other questions from the audience. Is it true? There's someone?
Wow.
Hi, you can also make MDMA from sassafras. I was curious if that is safer and more qualitative than making it in a chemical way or consuming it in a chemical way.
From a chemist's perspective, the MDMA as a molecule is MDMA. It doesn't matter what route you arrive to it. It's kind of like doing mathematics perhaps, where 6 plus 2 equals 8 and 4 plus 4 equals 8. It doesn't matter what the route is, the end product is identical by definition. If it resulted in any difference in the end product, it would be arguably a completely different end product. The only exception to that would perhaps be if there was a large amount of the precursor left in, and if maybe through a chemical route there might be a different process that resulted in a lesser amount of the precursor. And the only way that that's causing a difference is by an increased strength of product, because those precursors, at the amounts that they are taken in the MDMA, do absolutely nothing. In fact, the body is really, really effective at removing them.
Of course, you can have chemical contamination when you make it in a chemical way.
Yes, but again, I think the amounts that are, if we think about the amount of MDMA that's taken, perhaps 0.1 or 0.15 grams, the contaminants, MDMA tickles the brain in just the right way. It manages to migrate in and fit right in those receptors, and it's because it's a good fit that it's effective. The other compounds that may be present are a much, much worse fit and may not be able to get into the brain. So if we were going to see problems from them, they would be much less significant than the problems from MDMA itself. And yes, in fact, what we see is that they are passed through the body very quickly, and they have little or typically no effect whatsoever on the actual experience. Thank you, Claire.
Are there any other questions from the audience at the moment? Does Mark have a question for you? Okay. In the meanwhile, I'll ask you a question. The high-dose ecstasy pills that we see on the market, does it also? Do you also see that there's more incidents because of that at the first aid?
Now, at the dance events, we don't see more patients at the first aid, but the incidents, medical incidents, are more severe. For 6-7 years ago, we had low dosage MDMA, and then you get people at first aid with nausea, vomiting, fainting, that kind of thing, and they stay for 20 minutes, 35 minutes, and they get back to the party. Nowadays, with the increase of the potency, you see not only fainting, vomiting, but also agitation and anxiety, and even cardiac problems. So we don't see more patients, but the incidence is more severe, and especially also with tourists. In Holland we are mostly educated with take a half a pill, take a quarter of a pill, and we see, when we see tourists, they don't have any knowledge how to take drugs, and they combine it, and they mostly take too much. The average stay at the post is about 20 minutes, and with tourists it can be 2 or 3 hours. So that's what we see.
Yeah, thanks. That was almost exactly my question, actually. But I'll phrase the next question. Sjoerd, does this match with your, because you've been doing these big festivals for quite some years? Do you see some differences over the last years?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, I completely agree with what he says. I think the amount of people that enter the medical service station is roughly the same, but I think somewhere like 3-4 years ago, something changed, maybe 5 years ago, when the dosage of MDMA in an ecstasy tablet raised, our life became completely different. I mean, you know, when you put down a festival, there's about 1 million things that go wrong. I always managed to sleep very well the night before the festival, but all of a sudden, I had another fear or worry. Is everybody going alive home? And this is something I think a lot of people don't realize, but this has completely changed the whole ball game. And yeah, I think it's mainly because of the higher dosage of MDMA and people not knowing what they're doing, which is really strange to me, because you go to a doctor, you get a prescription, you read it, and you know you're well informed. And when the market changes, you get a bijsluiter. I don't know what the English word is for bijsluiter. Well, it's a little paper that says this will prescription. This will happen to you when you take so and so. But the ecstasy market changed, and there was no bijsluiter, and so all of a sudden people were taking different pills than they were used to, and I think it took a couple of years for people to adjust to that.
And is that something that you talk about with other organizers as well?
Yes, and we talk about it within our organization as well, because it puts a lot of stress on us. Because that's another thing, you know, when preparing a festival, you talk to the police, you say, oh, I'm not a drug dealer, I deal with music and happiness. Then you employ like a 120-person security squad that, checks on your premises that people are not taking drugs. You hire a complete hospital, and, you know, I really, you know,
it also affects our normally we had basic life support, the normal first aid events, but we now need more doctors and nurses now because the incidents are more serious, so we need a bigger expertise on these events. It's necessary.
Yeah, because you're running this Celebrate Safe campaign, which actually kind of started mainly because organizers were saying, oh, we have to deal with this problem and we see a lot of problems. Can you tell us something about that? What you're doing with the organizers?
Yeah, I think it's because the promoters or club owners, they already do a lot of things, and they also have to do a lot of things which are mainly focusing on creating a safe setting. And I think this whole situation for some of them, the initiative came from IDT, was more like, okay, we want to do more, and we also want to, you know, talk to our public and communicate to our public, but we are not the experts in sending out health-related messages, so we cooperated together. So we have the expertise of the promoters and the communication channels, like their social media and everything, so that we could really increase the reach of important prevention messages. And somehow people always think, yeah, but I mean, it's strange, we have a lot of incidents, it's risky, why just not put up posters and say, this is really dangerous and don't take high-dosed tablets. And it's not as simple as that. I mean, if it was as simple as that, there are a lot of risky behavior we do, even though we know they're quite risky. So one of the things we are really trying to do is also through studying this complex behavior and through, it's called Party Panel, and about taking high doses of MDMA. It was also for us interesting to find out that the people who were in our study, they were very well aware of that increases the risk and even negative side effects. But for them, the expected positive effects or positive experiences of taking these higher doses was much more related to, in the end, their behavior. Except for there was one interesting difference that one of the least desirable effects of MDMA was to become more introspective, so less social, but they were not aware that taking a high dose of MDMA can actually create this effect. So there we found our thing, our message we can communicate to maybe change this behavior and reduce the risks.
Stuart, you're actually already doing quite a lot. You already have a hospital, you have security, you try to keep the drugs out, you're doing all kinds of prevention. What more can be expected from you? What else can we do to prevent people from...
Not much really, I think. We're doing quite a lot. I think, you know, our visitors play a really, really important part in this as well. But I think we've come to a sort of society where a lot of people expect to be, everything is arranged. And, you know, a ticket to a festival is like a guarantee for safety. Whatever stupid behavior or ignorant behavior or, sometimes coincidental behavior happens, I am not responsible. And maybe I'm putting it a little bit black and white, but sometimes it really feels like that. I remember, I was thinking about it. There was this guy, he ended up in our medical station, and it ended up in what we call an A1 ambulance situation. This means an ambulance is being called because somebody has to be rushed to the hospital because it's a life-threatening situation. And some of the guys told me afterwards, his brother was standing next to him and he said, "Oh yeah, my brother is suffering from diabetes. He's doing this all the time." Fortunately, he lived and everything was well, but he gave us a really shit weekend because all the time, in the back of your head, you know there's somebody on the intensive care fighting for his life. But I went back to my office. We have an office on the festival side, and I was Googling diabetes MDMA, and all it says is do not, stupid, stupid, stupid. And I'm like, so why is this guy on my festival doing something which is obviously really, really, really not very smart? And why is he acting like this? Why is he showing this kind of behavior? Doesn't he know that he's putting himself in a very dangerous situation, or he doesn't care, or maybe he doesn't think about the consequences that, you know? And this is something that's been puzzling me ever since. Where is the responsibility of the visitor in this?
So you're actually saying visitors should be more responsible, should think for themselves?
Yes, because, you know, when we do large inquiries afterwards, it all shows everybody's over 18, highly educated, and therefore not stupid.
Yeah, true.
But we create, and that's the strange thing of our job. We create an environment where we tell people act stupid, but not too stupid. Yeah. And this is a really fine line, of course, because yeah.
Are there any other questions from the audience before we begin? Yeah.
This is more directed to Guy Jones, but I was wondering, what are the permanent effects that MDMA has on the brain relative to the frequency of usage?
So what we see with regular use of MDMA, and this is something that some people seem more vulnerable to than others, particularly seems to result from the way that MDMA is broken down in the body, and one of the breakdown products then causes problems. So the breakdown product is then very similar still to serotonin, but it can be oxidized in the brain. And when we think about, we take antioxidants to try and protect the body from these, what we call oxidative species. Sorry, there's a lot of technical language in this. When we think about taking antioxidants to protect against these oxidative species, that's because they're problematic and they can cause damage. With an oxidative compound that is so similar to a neurochemical that's in the brain, a neurotransmitter, it means it gets taken up directly and specifically into the serotonin neurons. And because it's being kind of concentrated there, that damage appears to be concentrated there. Now, for most people, it will never get to a point where it's like a really serious, terrible, and absolutely not life-threatening. And for most people, it's kind of self-limiting, because that direct damage to the serotonin system means that they aren't enjoying MDMA anymore. it's not as effective. They're just getting those stimulant effects and the side effects, and they're not really getting the pro-social effects that they enjoy. But if people do continue to push it, then there appears to be some link between verbal memory, so the recall of words, and also the come down of MDMA becomes much more severe. So it's not going to be a life-threatening issue, but it's something that even just from an enjoyment perspective, people want to avoid. And yes, it seems that there are some minor issues with verbal recall that probably people want to avoid as well.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much.
There's no. Raoul, you get to answer a lot of questions because you're on parties and people come up to you at Unity to ask you questions. What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding when you look at all the things people think about drugs?
Well, we get a lot of questions, but one of the main themes that reoccur all the time is that people forget that the effect a drug has depends on the drug itself, of course, the set, but also the setting. So the set means, like, who are you? Are you a little bit ill? What is your personal makeup? How do you feel? And the setting is, where are you? And when people come up, it's like, oh, well, I'm not enjoying this drug. What's in the drug? What's happening? People always attribute all the effects of the drug to just the drug, instead of thinking about the way they feel and where they are. And as Guy already said, like, well, the environment also is a huge factor. And one of the things that often people ask, like, why am I just a little bit energetic when I've taken MDMA or ecstasy? And that's what he explained as well. Like, if you take it too often, you mostly have the energetic effect and not so much the I love the world effect. And a lot of people, just the reason why a lot of people take MDMA. So I think that's one of the main themes that we answer on parties most of the time.
And I think we see that as well, where people are maybe not enjoying MDMA as much because they have overused it in the past. They'll very often think, well, it must be the drug that's changed. It can't possibly be the squishy stuff up here that changes every day. It has to be this single chemical compound, and it's somehow different to what it was in the 90s or what it was in the 2000s. And mysteriously...
Everything was better in the 90s.
Sure.
Come on.
Mysteriously, it always relates to the time when they first started taking MDMA and when they found it most enjoyable, and they have these really fond memories, and they think, MDMA's changed, it's not like it used to be. No, it's not that chemical compound that's changing, it's this squishy stuff up here.
Is there one last question from the audience? No? Okay, then I have a question from Mark still. Mark, what I hear is that a lot of people get left alone when they when something goes wrong and they end up at emergency alone. Why is it a problem for you?
It gives me a lot of work. Fortunately, with ecstasy, you see a lot of friends coming with them. But when they stay at the post and they're anxious or aroused, it's better to have a friend with you who can ease you down and guide you. Also, when you want to go home, you don't feel completely better at the first aid. But it's wise to go home early, and so we're always happy when a friend comes, so he can guide the person to his house. Or sometimes if it's really wrong, we can give information to his friend for go see a medical practitioner next day, or tell the ambulance personnel what will happen. So we can get a lot more information and give a lot more information. And they can help us make this person better.
Do you also notice that people are afraid to tell you that they've been using drugs, or?
Tourists are. Yeah, tourists are not a problem, but you see a difference. They don't come as fast to the first aid because they think I can expel from the party or something, and they don't want to tell what they have. And
or they don't speak a language. You know, Italian people who only speak Italian, and we don't have any Italian-speaking staff.
They all understand MDMA or cocaine, but they don't want to tell. And fact, it's not very important. I treat the medical issue, but it's for me yeah, good to know if it's ecstasy or amphetamine or cocaine. I treat the person with stimulantia, but around stimulantia, but I want to know the duration or the process. But and those people always tell me, and especially people with MDMA, they tell everything.
The whole life story.
Whole life story.
Starting at age 0. Judith, how is it possible that some users seem to know so much about their drugs and still they don't take the right measures to prevent getting into trouble?
Well, I think I've kind of explained that before, that they are pretty aware of the risks, but this awareness of this risk is not the most important factor that's influencing their behavior. And I mean, we also have to, I think most ecstasy users are quite responsible users, and there has been some research done by Trimbos as well, and a lot of them do take some kind of harm reduction measures. It's not that people are just taking drugs and not thinking about it or not reading stuff, or it's just, yeah, it's just balancing out the positive and negative effects, and risks, especially risks on the long term, are at the moment when you're partying not as important.
Sure, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I would like to. I mean, of course, I was ranting on about all these people who are, irresponsible. But I really like to stress out that 99.9% of our visitors are really well-behaved, very nice people who probably know what they're doing. Now, otherwise, we wouldn't be having these events anymore. If people are being killed by the dozens, but fortunately, this is not the case. So,
sure, you're an organizer. You have to do this. You're probably going to do this for a long time, organizing parties, I think. But how do you see the future? I mean, what should change to make sure that incidents happen less?
Education, yeah. He was whispering, but but education, prescription, handing out more. And this is also why we as promoters stepped into the prevention game as well, because we think it's very important that people know what they're doing. And of course, people want to take risks. Taking risks is part of life, part of growing up. It's nice to live on the edge. But some sort of education is always good, especially when you're not knowing what you're taking. And this is what really, because not everybody goes out to test service knows exactly what they're doing. But some basic information of how your body responds to certain situations, to certain drugs. Yeah, that's really important.
Is there any last question? I'll ask the last question and then we'll end the session. No? Okay, there in the back. Oh, there.
You talked a lot about dehydration and this kind of effects, and how important is it to drink water. What about beer? Can I drink lager beer, for example, and is it safe or not?
Likes the beer, yes.
So yes, of course, it's not just about drinking enough, but not drinking too much. And alcohol really not only affects, it has a psychological effect, obviously, a pharmacological effect, but it also really changes the way that the body processes hydration. And it comes back to what I said about combinations being unpredictable, because one drug is operating in one direction and making you pee less, the other drug is making you pee more. It's really difficult to say, this is a safe amount of lager that you can drink. And so what we think really is it's ideal to, if you are going to drink alcohol, keep it to a really small amount. And also keep in mind that the depressant effects of alcohol, the sedative effects, are likely to temper and reduce some of the enjoyment of the stimulant effects of MDMA. So there may be, from not only a health perspective, but an enjoyment perspective, a good reason to keep your lager consumption to a lower level if you're taking MDMA.
Thank you.
Mark, you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, this is also what we see at first aid. When a drug-induced problems, 80% is also alcohol involved. Single drug use, you don't oversee it at first aid, but when there's alcohol with it, the dehydration effect, and but especially the effect of the combination, that's causing the problems.
So we would say no, don't drink alcohol with MDMA.
One or the other.
Okay, well we've run over time already, so I want to thank you all very much for being here on the session. I really enjoyed it, I hope you did too. Have a great ADE and celebrate.